So I thought we would take a quick look at creating a custom brush in Illustrator. It's pretty nifty, and you can make a brush out of anything. Like if you can draw it, you can select it, you can turn it into a brush. Now, what makes for a useful brush and how you define the brush makes a big difference. So let's take a look at a few of the options. We're not going to look at everything, but just to get the basic idea in your head. Okay, so I'm going to start by placing a paint splatter into my document here. So I'm going to go to the File menu and choose Place. Remember, this is how you get things like bitmaps into Illustrator. And so I've made a splatter of paint, and I'm going to place it. See that? I think you might recognize where this thing came from. So now, image trace in Illustrator, if you've not tried it, can be really helpful. When you first bring in something like a bitmap into Illustrator, if you look on the right-hand side in the Properties panel, one of your options is going to be image trace. See that? So with my bitmap selected, I'm going to hit that image trace button, and I'm going to choose, just for the sake of what we're doing today, I'm just going to use the default settings. Now, if you want some control over the look of this traced image, you need to go to the settings for that tracing. Again, in the image trace area over here, you're going to see this guy right here. That's the image trace panel. And this helps you control how the vector version of your bitmap is going to be traced, right? So there's, here are the standard default settings at the top, and the preset that we're using is the default setting. And it's basically black and white. It forces anything that's gray or anything that's colored to become black or white. And this is actually pretty useful. Tracing full color images can sometimes get to be a little crazy, but you should explore all of the options and learn what you can about it. But we're going to keep it simple today. All right, so the threshold setting is really important, right? This basically tells Illustrator, okay, at what point does this level of gray become black or white, right? It's examining the original photo, and it's determining, okay, as I move this slider, I'm going to have less dark area and more light area, right? Or if I move the other way, it's going to go the other direction. Okay, so if you're feeling bold, you can go to the advanced settings also. Here's where you can control like how many paths are being used to draw this thing. Fewer paths means it's less accurate, but also simpler, right? Like fewer corners, same basic idea. If I have fewer corners, it simplifies the image. More corners means it's more complex and more detailed. And then finally, the noise setting. If you've got less of a noise threshold, I'm going to get more of that noise on the original, like from the original photo. As I increase that, it's going to, again, get rid of like little stray bits and pieces here and there. Okay, and I want this to be fairly simple, so I'm going to increase that quite a bit. Okay, so there are a few options when you're tracing something that can help you get the look that you want. Okay, so I'm going to close this now, and this is really important. After you've traced something, if you want it to behave like a normal object, you have to tell Illustrator that you want to expand it. So I'm going to hit the expand button down here in the image trace section. Now I have access to the points and paths like I do a normal object in Illustrator. And until you expand it, it's going to still think you want to hang on to those tracing options, and you're going to be limited as a result of that. So now you're going to notice I've got this white background, right? I've got individual objects here, but I've also got the original white background. I'm going to hit the delete key on the keyboard to get rid of that. And what I should be left with are just the two splatter pieces, right? Okay. Now, let's turn that into a brush, shall we? So I'm going to come over here to my docked panels next to the property panel and choose the brushes, right? And now I can always go to the window menu. If I don't see the panel that I want, I can go and find it under the window menu and it'll open it up. Okay, so there are very few brushes in the default set. So what I'm going to do is, like, you know, if you look down here at the bottom of the brushes panel, there we go. You've got brush libraries, and there are things like arrows and artistic brushes and borders and bristle brushes and all sorts of good things that you can explore here. But we're just going to make our own out of the art that we have selected right now. So again, at the bottom of your brushes panel, there is the new brush button. It's important that you've got the artwork selected. I'm going to hit the new brush button there. And I've got different types of brushes that I can choose from. Calligraphic, scatter brushes, art brushes, bristle, pattern. And you should explore all of these and see what they can do for you. I'm going to start with a simple art brush. Okay, and so here are my brush options. You can give it a name, like, you know, your first option is going to be whether it's going to be fixed width, or are you going to use something like a tablet. You know, if you have a tablet and you can use the pressure sensitivity of the stylus with that tablet, you might set it for that. Otherwise, you're just going to have like fixed width as your option. You know, I have a tablet and I'm going to use it, so I'm going to go ahead and choose pressure, because the pressure that I apply with my stylus and my tablet will change the size and the width of the brush stroke. Okay, the scaling options. If you want the look of the art to stay consistent, you choose scale proportionally. If you want the artwork to stretch the entire length of the stroke that you make, you could choose that stretch to fit, or you can stretch between, you know, guides. Like you can actually say, okay, well, the start and end points, you know, in the artwork here. So you can play around with that and test those options. I'm going to leave mine on scale proportionally for now. I can always adjust these later if I want. Okay, so next I can choose the direction of the stroke, and you know, top to bottom. You know, like, take a look at your artwork and see which one of these makes the most sense to you. To me, this is the blunt end of the stroke, and you know, it tapers this direction. So I'm going to choose that, you know, stroke from left to right option on this, in this case. But you may, you know, depending on the artwork that you've got, test out different stroke directions. And you can colorize these things. Like, you can, you know, if you started with artwork that has color in it, you could choose to create tints of that color, shades and tints, or shift the hue, the color altogether, right? So you can play around with that. You can click this little eyedropper and choose which color. In this case, both of my splotches are black, so it's always going to be black, whichever one I click on. But just so you've got those options if you need them. And then you can flip the artwork along different axes, right? Anyway, play around with these options. Okay, so I've just defined that as a brush. And if you look here in the document, it's called My Special Brush, just like I named it. Okay, so I'm going to move the original artwork out of the way here. I'm going to get my stylus out, and I'm going to come over to the toolbox and get the brush tool, right? And I've got that brush that I just created active, and I can click and drag. If I, with the pressure sensitivity, if I press very lightly, it's going to make a shorter, smaller stroke. If I press and drag, it's going to make a larger stroke, right? And if I click in a curve like that, it'll curve a bit, right? So, pretty cool. All right, so let's try something else. Let's give ourselves some color options, right? If I were to define the brush, but give it some color first. I should do purple. Okay. Now I can go to my brushes panel. I'll make a new version of that brush that has color this time. I'll let it stretch to fit this time, okay? And I'll leave it fixed width, just for those of you who don't have a stylus. You can see kind of what's going on. All right, and so colorization, I can try, like tints and shades of that key color, right? Let's see what happens. See, I'm getting a darker shade. And you can see it's distorting now. I didn't tell it to use that fixed width, right? Let me undo those. Now I can also go back to my brushes here, right? And double click it. And now I can modify this if I wanted to just do tints of that color, right? And I'm going to go back to stretch proportionally and set the pressure. Oops, I applied the brush to my artwork. That's not good. Okay, so now, tints only, pressure. If you hit Command Z, it'll undo your brush that you just made. All right, see, now I'm getting tints of that color, right? So explore your options. Now, sometimes if you're too quick with the stylus, it'll give you some pretty erratic looking elements. So, and again, if you're not happy, like back up, double click your brush, change the settings, and try it again. Again, like short strokes, smaller instance, large strokes, larger instances. Okay. All right, so let's try another type of brush. Okay, so if I select my original artwork, go to my brushes panel, make a new one. Let's do a scatter brush. Again, you can set these to either fixed or random, or use pressure, or use the tilt of your stylus if you're using a stylus. Again, if you're not using a stylus, a lot of these options won't even show up for you. So just a word of warning, if you're using a mouse rather than a stylus, a lot of this won't be active. It'll just be grayed out. Okay, so now again, I can adjust the minimum and maximum sizes and or settings for each of these things. But just so you know what a scatter brush is, I can click and drag and it creates a whole group of those instances of that brush stroke very quickly for me, right? And again, you can set, it to scatter wider from your brush stroke or closer, adjust the spacing between the instances, all sorts of fun. Okay, now, last one, let's make a pattern brush. Okay, now this one, basically, like you can click and drag, and your brush instance is going to follow that path that you draw. And so I'm going to just leave the scale at fixed, and I'm going to reduce this because I don't want it to be as large as that brush is. So I'm going to make that quite a bit smaller. And you can change different options for how this thing follows along, right? You can adjust the spacing percentage. You can stretch it. You can add space to fit. You can approximate the path. Play around with these different options and figure out what you like, what it can do for you. But if I were to click and drag, you'll see it'll just follow my brush stroke. Pretty cool, huh? Anyway, there you have it. Get in there, make some custom brushes, see what kind of trouble you can get into. All right, have fun.